Það ekki seinna vænna að bara fara að byrja og kæri rektor og aðstoðarrektorar og allir góði gestir, Denís og fyrirlesarar, verið hjartalega velkomin hingað í dag. Ég heiti Guðrún Geirsdóttir og dósent á meistaravísindasviði og deildastjóri Kennslumiðstöðvar og ég á að vera kynnir hérna í dag, verður kannski smá vandræði þegar ég kynni mig og eftir en ég mun gera það mjög vel. Mér langar að bara við byrjum þetta og reynum að halda tíma áætlun og mér langar að bjóða Steinunni Gestsdóttur aðstoðarrektor Kennsluþróunar að koma og setja ráðstefnunni. Ég held að við höfum átt að gera þetta í öfurröð, en það allt í lagi.
Góðan dag, kæri gestir. Innilega velkomin á Kennsluþróunarráðstefna Háskóla Ísalnds 2017. Ég heiti Steinunni Gestsdóttir, ég aðstoðarrektor kennslumál og þróunar og það sem aðal fyrirlesar okkar í dag enskumælandi og innlegg hennar kemur strax í kjölfar míns. Þá ætla ég að fá að leyfa mér að hafa innleggið mitt á ensku og ég vona ykkur sé sama. En allir aðrir hluta ráðstefnunar og eftir þessum 2 innleggjum verða á íslensku. So again, welcome everyone. One of the main topics of today is the quality of teaching. How do we support it? How do we develop it? How do we assess it? And how do we make a system that ensures quality? I want to start by welcoming our key speaker of today, Dr. Denise Chalmers, professor at the Western Australia University. Dr. Chalmers is a leading expert on teaching development and assessing the quality of teaching in higher education. She has received many recognitions of her work, including the OLT National Senior Teaching Fellowship in 2015 for her work on the Australian Teaching Criteria and Standards Framework, a framework which has already been utilized and implemented in universities across the world. Dr. Chalmers has spent the week here at the University of Iceland, and she has met with the university leadership, including the rector, vice rectors, and the heads of school, as well as the director of the Division of Academic Affairs, the Center for Teaching and Learning, members of our teaching committees, both centrally and in 5 schools, and more. And I want to thank Dr. Chalmers for being very fun, but for her invaluable contribution to the discussion of quality of teaching and learning here at the University of Iceland. And of course, we will have that discussion throughout the day. Also, I want to thank Guðrún Geirsdóttir, Elva Björg Einarsdóttir, where is she? And all the staff at the Center for Teaching and Learning for their selfless and tireless work to make this conversation and Dr. Chalmers' visit possible. But before I invite Dr. Chalmers here to the podium, I want to talk very briefly about how we can better support quality of teaching and learning within the university, what we're doing now and what can we do better. And I think I have about 7 minutes to address this small issue. So very quickly and very broadly, how do we assess quality of teaching here at the University of Iceland? There are probably 3 main ways in which the system, as it is now, evaluates and rewards teaching performance. First, as most of you know, we both have mid-semester and end-of-course surveys, where each individual instructor, as well as each individual class, is assessed by the students. And the findings of these surveys are supposed to be discussed or addressed by the faculty, the teaching committees, and in staff interviews. And we know these give us limited insights, but they also give us very important insights into the teaching, and we can certainly do better in utilizing the findings of these surveys. We also have the well-known evaluation system for the public higher education institutions in Iceland, eða matskerfið. And now Denise has become an expert in that too. So we know that this is based on annual evaluations of individual academics, but we also know that it heavily relies on assessing research. And the points that each person gets for research productivity is widely used to distribute rewards throughout the system, including salaries, bonuses, promotions, sabbaticals, and research funding, both to the individual and to faculties. And then finally, we have, of course, rules for promotion and tenure, which, like the evaluation system, both assesses teaching contributions as well as research contributions. But again, we also know that it heavily relies or favors assessments of research. And I'm in no way suggesting that we shouldn't be very critical in how we evaluate research contribution or the importance of research contributions. But we have to think about how we weigh research versus teaching. And so just to give an example, and I know the points are not equivalent between different fields, but it's still a telling example that to be promoted to full professor, you need 50 points for teaching, but 270 for research. So, although these are the formal ways in which we evaluate teaching contributions, I should mention there are, of course, many, many ways in which we try to support teaching development and the quality of teaching. We, of course, have grants for teaching development. We have the tireless work of the Institute for Teaching and Learning. We have the very active teaching committees, both centrally and within each of the 5 schools, etc. But, however, we need to do better. We need to do better in supporting our academic staff in developing as educators. We need to do better in developing diverse methods of teaching. And we need to do better in developing our programs of academic programs. And I think that at this time there are 2 efforts undergoing. We are undergoing 2 efforts that really give us great opportunities to do exactly that. So there are 2 ongoing changes or projects that I think we can utilize to better support teaching and learning. So first is the ongoing assessment of the evaluation system. And I trust that most of you or all of you know what this assessment is. The main questions that are being asked through this evaluation is whether the impact of the system on the university are too wide-ranging, and I mentioned a few of them on my previous slide. Also, we question whether research carry too much weight compared to teaching and service. And then finally, we have to think critically about what does the system evaluate. Are we evaluating quantity? Are we evaluating quality? Or are we evaluating impact? And we have already had both internal and external assessments of this system. And the external evaluation report was discussed at an open meeting about 2 weeks ago here. And this is a project that is led by the Pro-Rector of Science, Guðbjörg Linda Rafnsdóttir. And she and her team are now developing the next steps that will be taken to utilize these findings that we now have and think about how we may want to change the system. So this is a big opportunity to change how we evaluate the work that we do within the university and how we can better support our staff. The other thing I want to mention that also gives us an opportunity is the new strategy of the University of Iceland. Most of you probably know this already. We had a new strategy for the university that we started implementing it just over a year ago. So we are now in the 2nd year of implementation. And in this strategy, which is called Successful University, Thriving Society, or Hái 21, we identified 5 main focus areas of the strategy. So these are the changes we are trying to implement with the whole strategy. And I want to just quickly mention the first one, which is a progressive vision for teaching and learning that prepares students to participate in society and industry. And it is not a coincidence that this is the first main focus area of the strategy. It implies the importance of making teaching and learning a top priority in the work of the university. All of these emphases or focus areas are then better implemented through goals and objectives. And the goals and objectives are directed at different parts of the university or different areas of our work. So we identified goals and objectives for research, for teaching and learning, and active participation, as well as the human resources on which all of these are built. And again, I'm not going to go into details, but I want to outline the goals that are identified for teaching and learning within this strategy. And especially the first one, the quality of teaching and learning environment, giving greater weight and support in the operations of the university. And that is exactly what we're trying to do by, for example, setting a new policy on teaching and learning, which is now underway, and by assessing the evaluation system. There are other objectives or goals under the teaching and learning chapter. One is about lowering the student-teacher ratio, and then we specify our objectives for undergraduate studies, master's programs, and doctoral studies. And finally, we also think especially about international collaborations for students. And all of these are then implemented through well-defined objectives, 3 to 5 per each goal, which you can find in the strategy. So I think it is safe to say that the university is both interested in and recognizes the importance of better evaluating and supporting quality of teaching, and that we now are at a time where we have a really real chance to do that and make significant change. So I think I am not going to take more of our time on discussing this, and I know we have a very exciting day ahead of us. Of course, oh, this is not right. All right, you can see parts of the program, but you have the program with you, so that should be okay. But of course, I know you want to hear from our keynote speaker, Denise Chalmers, today. So I hope you have a really fun and productive day today, and I invite Dr. Chalmers now to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and thank you very much for the introduction. After that introduction, I don't think I need to say anything. You're well on the way. And you've got a lot of really interesting projects happening. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that are happening in the context of the world, wider, what's happening in particularly the Western education system. Because these are the sorts of things we're thinking about in terms of what is quality teaching, what does excellent teaching look like, and how can we reward and recognise it. So, what is an excellent student experience? That's one of your goals, that teaching improves the excellent student experience. And is that what really matters? Because all of the rest of those things, the private study, the fun, the engagement, the work experience, the field practice, the lectures, all of those are part of what an excellent student experience is. And we survey the students and we ask them how they had a really good time. But do we really think then, how did that happen? How did they learn enough to get a job? How did they acquire those workability, employability skills? And in fact, is there anything the university did other than time that helped them get there? because we know the students mature. They're with us for 3, 4, 5 years. They grow up, they have part-time work, and they learn. And are they learning because of what we're doing, or are they learning in spite of what we're doing? And sometimes it's in spite of, not because of. So we really do need to think about the quality of teaching and what we need to do as an organisation to ensure that the quality of teaching is the best it can be. So why should we bother providing an excellent student experience, and why should it matter to Icelandic universities? It's sort of a dumb question. Institutional prestige and reputation. Regardless of how fabulous our research is, most of our community knows us through our engagement with students, their sons, their daughters, their nieces, their nephews, their husbands, their wives. So their experience with us as an institution is through the teaching, almost primarily. They went to university here or one of the other institutions. Their children are. Their engagement with our research is quite light. They might know about it, but it's not a personal interaction that it is. So if we don't look after our teaching and learning and the experience and the times of learning, it will influence our institutional prestige and reputation. So we need both, not either or. We have an obligation to our students, to our community, and to our nation. This is a small nation. You have a few number of institutions, so it matters even more to you. In Australia, we have 40 public universities. We have 200 private education providers. If one's not doing a good job, we've got alternatives. Here, your alternatives are a little less, and so it matters even more. So your obligation, I think, probably is higher in the minds of the people in this university and in this institution. And it is a key pillar on what distinguishes a quality university. And you'll find that universities like Stanford and Oxford and MIT and the different types of universities, whichever you mention, also get quite highly rated and considered for their teaching. They're highly research intensive, but they are very focused on the aspect of what's happening in this teaching and learning. So, how are you doing? And you've had a couple of external reports to say, probably not as well as you should be. Now, that's not being critical. That's what happens everywhere. The quality of teaching is under question by almost all governments and all quality agencies, because the feeling is we've got the message wrong in terms of how we recognise and reward teaching. What often isn't put together is that unless we are supporting our staff by recognising and rewarding, so we have to know what good teaching is, we have to know what quality teaching is, but then we need to recognise and reward it if we are going to achieve an excellent student experience. So we can say we want one, fabulous, come students, you will have an excellent time, but we ignore the teaching, then we're not going to give our students that. So we do need to put those things together and understand them as such. But it does depend on what's recognised and rewarded. And so your recent external report says you really are quite good at recognising and rewarding research in a particular way. Here are the points you can get for doing this research and publications. And lo and behold, publications have gone up. Certainly by number, some measures of quality there, but it does depend on what you recognise, it does depend on what you reward, and then people take notice of it. And so if we're going to recognise and reward teaching, we need to be very careful about the aspects that we recognise and reward. And we also need to reconsider what we're recognising and rewarding in research. And is it in fact giving us the quality and the impact we want there? Because we can see it skews behaviour. We're a very bright group of people who know how to say, I know how to get there. So we need to think about that really carefully. It's not often you see that. What do you do? I'm a physicist. What do you do? I'm an engineer. What do you do? I'm a social scientist. I'm a health professional. Who says, first up, I teach physics? I'm an academic of physics teaching, or science, or agriculture, or education. It's sort of what we do, and it's interesting because it gets in the way of our research. I have yet to see anyone who gets a research grant so they can buy out their research so they can do more teaching. And maybe we need to think about that in terms of what we do. Oh, we've got too many teaching hours. What does that mean? It means I have too many hours to teach so I can't do my research. Instead of I've got too many research hours, I need to do more teaching. So our concept is framed quite differently. And so what we are hoping for is that we can change the balance. And this is a question that is really challenging people all over the world. How do we get the balance better for that? And so here are some of the challenges that are stopping us in many ways. Now, this is work that has got 30 years of evidence to support these claims. So prestige is conferred on disciplinary researchers. Now, this is prestige within the discipline as well as outside of the discipline. Oh, you're a professor of engineering. Oh. You're a teacher of engineering. Oh. Okay. So within our body of people, the people who have the prestige, it's within the discipline of the researchers there. We know that greater teaching loads are often assigned as a punishment for not being as successful in research. So the less successful researchers or the failed researchers get more time. Which researcher is arguing for more time to teach? Most don't. You argue for the least possible and the least number of students and maybe more of the PhD students and the least of the undergraduate teaching, because it is seen as it means it's either interfering with my capacity to do research or that's what failed researchers get. And that's not appropriate. We have 3 pillars in this university, as in almost every other university: teaching, research and service. And yet the weighting and the prestige and the loads are different. We know that promotion is based on teaching excellence is quite rare. We every now and then have an extraordinary teacher who is promoted. Extraordinary. We all have one. Oh yes, we promote teaching. Professor X, we've promoted them. It's only one. It's possible. It's unlikely. And this would be true across the world as well. Salaries and appointment levels are lower for those who do more teaching, and there's a lot of research, particularly through the US, that shows the more hours, just on number of hours you teach, your salaries and your appointment levels are lower and consistently stay lower. We know that there are teaching-focused appointments where, whether they're called that or not, they might be casual, part-time, limited term contracts. They might be called, as we're seeing in Australia and England and the US now, teaching-focused appointments. They're disproportionately at the lower levels, so people are locked into a position at the lower levels of appointment lecturer, and they're short-term and limited-term contracts, and they're largely female. And this is international and widespread. We know that educational research is not regarded on the same level as disciplinary research. Evidence is dismissed. So you've published in that journal, or that's a high prestige journal, fabulous. Oh, and you've published about your teaching too. Oh, that's very nice. But you haven't published much in the research disciplinary. You've published a lot in the education of physics, the education of accounting. Very good, but it's not disciplinary research. And so our own colleagues in our own faculties, in our own disciplines, value them differently. Okay? Disciplinary research, it's nice, but it's not the same for teaching. We know that teaching practice is undervalued. Anyone can teach. We won't bother with any training. We won't bother whether you actually know what to do. Hop in that classroom and teach, because anyone can do that. No skills required. But we'll make you do a PhD and a postdoc for your research. You need a lot of training for that. But teach, fine, don't worry, smile. Professional and personal identity is strongly tied to being a researcher in the discipline. When we look at what happens with leadership, their responses are typically focused on improving individual teaching practice. So when you're saying, teaching, the students aren't happy. Students are dropping out of these programs. Students are reporting that the teaching quality in this department's not very good. Yes, we'll send Dr. Joe off to the teaching centre. That'll fix it. So the solutions are individual and tagged to an individual, rather than looking at the system. So leadership responses tend to be, oh, well, we'll just send them off and get them fixed. But have we got anything systematic that's actually leading to that? And we don't ask those questions. So it's always, we'll get that person sorted, and that'll solve the problem. Yeah? And this is a question. Is that we have and continue to have, in our own minds as well as everybody else's within academe, that we have the complete academic myth in our mind, that someone is an extraordinary researcher, extraordinary teacher, and does public service and community and university service, all at a very high level, and that we need to, that's the person, that's what an academic is. And yet we know in our own departments, in our own practice, some people do more teaching and do it well. And we know some people do research and do it well, but they're actually pretty awful teachers. There is a lot of research to show that because you're a good researcher, you're not going to necessarily be a good teacher. And in fact, the correlation between being a good researcher and being a good teacher is about 0. Okay? So they're not one and the other. So people say, well, I must be a researcher, otherwise I can't teach. You need to be a good scholar, but you don't necessarily need to be a top researcher to be a good teacher. No correlation there. Sorry. So the argument's not there in that sense. So do we have a myth that someone must be a researcher and must be a good teacher, and those two must go together? But we know in our departments we have people who do much of the research and most people do much of the teaching, and they're not always the same thing. But what we've done is create a career path for the people who do the research, and we've put up a big roadblock for the people who do a lot of the teaching. Now, universities know that, and so they're trying to say we've got to get the balance right. So here's a statement from a modern university saying we need to invest more in teaching. And this is not isolated. I've been working around Australia for the last 5 years, particularly. Vice-Chancellors want to know, or rectors as you have here, want to know how can we change the balance and what can we do about it. So if you look at these sorts of things, we've got to put teaching at the centre of universities, we've got to have students at the centre of teaching and so on, we've got to have innovative teaching, and we need employability in the knowledge economy. So much like your first statement under your goals, particularly for those who are from this university. So we need to invest more in teaching. So what are we going to invest in? People. But we're not doing that very well now. So what does it mean in practice? So there were some things mentioned by Steinan earlier about typical ways that, or the ways that you've been rewarded and recognised in this university. And these rewards and recognition practices have been happening in universities since the 1960s, at least, that I could track down. Okay, so we have teaching awards or fellowships or whatever. You get a grant, you get recognition for what you've done, and they happen within institutions and in some places in countries nationally. And in Australia, we've been doing national awards for the last 20 years. That's nice, and fairly decent prize money. You know, 25,000, 30,000, higher for some cases. Pretty nice prize money. So that's nice, but we're doing that for 60 years, or since 1960. Has it changed anything? Not a lot. What's the impact on institutions? Not a lot. Does it make anyone want to be a teacher? Not a lot. So it's a way to recognise people who are doing a good job, and I'm not downplaying them. I've won an award myself, and I can tell you, I was just delighted. So it's nice to get the recognition, and it is a reward, but in and of itself it's not sufficient. Similarly, we've got grants for teaching initiatives. They never match the grants for research, but they're nice to have. And we have seed money, and we have people apply for it, and we have people doing really good work on those initiatives, and sometimes they grow into really big ones and sometimes they don't, but we have those within institutions, and in some places we have them national awards. And again, in Australia, in the UK, in Canada and various places, they have national grants that you can apply for, and that's fabulous. Hasn't changed anything. Changed people's practice and stuff. Has it meant an ongoing and a different view? Again, we're back into that problem. Oh, you've won a teaching grant. Oh, it's $250,000. Extraordinary. How much have you won for research? Not the same, but it's nice to have. Interestingly, what is classed as a reward and a recognition is professional development. Now, I've gone to many universities and they sort of look puzzled by that. A reward, a recognition, professional development, that's a punishment. That's what you have to do when you get first appointed. You've got to do the foundation of teaching program, and heads of schools say, you've got to go and do that, or whatever. So it's not necessarily viewed as a reward or a recognition, except if you're in industry. If you're in a bank or a business and they say, we're going to send you off in a course, wow, I'm being recognised, I'm being groomed, I'm being supported by being given these opportunities to do professional development. In universities, and particularly when it's around teaching and learning, it's sort of like, you've got to survive, you've got to put up with it, you might enjoy it, but, you know, get through it. So we have to stop and think. So it's not just courses, but it is things like sabbaticals. It is things like going to conferences and so on. So we need to think about how we frame and understand professional development. And it isn't a punishment. It is a reward, and in fact it has probably the best potential for changing practice within an institution and culture. So that's interesting, and they've been happening for the last, since 1960s or so, and its impact's almost nil in terms of changing the status of teaching. So it's good to do, but it's not sufficient. And one of these is because promotion is the final reward and recognition, and it's the least likely to happen. And we've went through some of those reasons before. Now, promotion is within an institution only, and it also carries with it aspects around salary and workload. And that's at the management and control of an institution, except in Iceland, where you have this external contribution from the national system, where it influences your sort of a bonus or a salary cap, if you like. But it's really interesting to think that. So those other things have been around forever, but what we've not had is promotion. And lo and behold, what have we found? Things haven't changed. So it matters. It's a really strong signal. So here are some of the challenges for enhancing the status of teaching. It requires much more than empirical evidence of instructional effectiveness. So we do know what good teaching looks like. We do know effective methodologies. We do know good practice, and it is based on very solid research that's been going since 1930s and so on, and before. I guess we could go back to Socrates and various other things, but we've got a lot of educational research, very robust, very solid, that says these educational practices are the most effective. And we blithely ignore them. So knowing or having that body of evidence for us, who are scientific and evidence-based, we like to ignore that scientific and evidence-based work and just do what I think it should be and what I think it happens in this discipline. So we'll ignore all that, but that's okay, because it really doesn't matter about that. So if we're going to value teaching, the research isn't going to help us in terms of valuing it. It's there. But it requires active intervention by academic leaders at the departmental, college and institutional level. So not just our rectors and vice-rectors and those people, but it's got to be the heads of schools. It's got to be the deans. It's got to be the leaders of the program. Because if it doesn't, it just sits up the top there as a statement and practice doesn't change. It requires effort to encourage a culture within academic programs that value teaching, whether through intervention in promotion, because that's a signal. Active engagement by institutional leaders is a prerequisite to teaching reforms to succeed. So everyone's got to be on board. And this is why so many initiatives have failed before, because the leadership might say something, the academics at the bottom might want something to change, but unless there is engagement in particularly that middle leadership area, it falls over all the time. So it has to be an institutional commitment. Okay? So I don't want to overemphasise promotion, although I have been, but it's a strong signal. Now, not everyone's going to be promoted. Not everyone can be a professor. But it should be the potential that you can think about salary and promotion and tenure should have clear guidelines as to what's required and a capacity and a system to get you there. It's a strong signal. Okay? And at the moment we don't have that strong signal there. But there are other ways to reward and recognise, and that should be part of building the culture. But without this signal, you may as well forget it. So, here's some steps for perhaps thinking about how you move to recognise and reward teaching. And this has been part of a national project that I've been working on and continue to work on. We call it the Australian University Teaching Criteria and Standards Project. This is something that isn't a set of standards and criteria that live outside of institutions. What we have is a framework and some indicative standards, indicative evidence that institutions can use to start a conversation. So there were some people here on Monday who looked at this framework and said, how would this work for our university? How would this work in Iceland? Would these work for us? No, yes, no. But it's a conversation. It's not that this is what each institution takes and adopts. It says, what's important for us? But it's starting with the criteria. And it's starting with saying, so what does it look like? Because we need to be clear. And at the moment in the University of Iceland, you've got to find 50 points, which I understand are largely based on quantity, how many years you've been teaching. Is that quality teaching? No. You can be teaching for 20 years and be horrible at it. You could be teaching for 5 years or 1 year and be fabulous. So quantity doesn't make quality. So we need to think about, what does quality look like? Quantity can be in there, but it's not in and of itself sufficient. So thinking about that. And so it takes time, and you need to review it. In many universities in Australia, they're appointing people on a teaching-focused appointment, but on those they can be promoted through to professor. It doesn't mean they don't have disciplinary knowledge. They still need a PhD in their discipline. It doesn't mean they can't do disciplinary research, but their focus is on scholarship of teaching, scholarly research, contribution to the teaching at a national or international level or whatever. So it's thinking about your appointments, because those people exist in our system already. They're already there. They just have no career prospects. So it's important to think. And a lot of people are saying, well, that's great. I've just lost the thread of the thought. So that's really great, but really, why don't we put all the failed researchers in that teaching category, and then we'll look better on our research assessment. So a lot of the people are saying, actually, we're going to pick who's going to be those teaching-focused people, not just dumping people who you don't actually do very good research and don't actually do very good teaching, and just pop them there in the teaching thing. We're going to control this. We're going to say we're going to select people who are demonstrably good teachers or who are demonstrably engaged in it and give them a career path. Okay? So it's a really interesting thing to think. Do we need to do that? Not necessarily, but we need to think about our profile. And we need to think about it at the program level. Who teaches into our program? Do we give the first year courses to the person who's just walked in for their first job? Or do we give our top professor in to inspire those teachers, those students? And a lot of decisions are being made about who teaches what in programs, not just on availability, but how do we make sure our students have a really engaging and wonderful experience and don't drop out and don't think this is the most boring course in the world, and really engage our students and think about that. And so if Professor X isn't a very good teacher but fabulous in his discipline, we probably are better off giving him or her the third year course or the fourth year course, where it's smaller and more focused and the students have developed skills and so on. So we need to plan the teaching of a program holistically and utilise the skills and the qualities of our teachers, and the very ones who are doing quality teaching and are excellent, they have a career path. Okay? And then we can do all of that and set it in place and put in policies and fabulous, and then we need to think about the promotion panels or the promotion process, because if you keep the same one and the same people on it, they will look at it and say, yeah, terrific, they're not doing much research. And that happens. So you've got it's a whole of system change, cultural change. What we developed as indicative criteria was 7. We reviewed the literature, we reviewed every university's criteria in Australia, and we went internationally, and basically we came up with these. Most universities you can find in Australia, we've had criteria for teaching quite a long time, so we could find numbers 1 to 6 okay, couldn't find 7. All the research says 7 really matters. These are the things that really matter to students. They can put up with not so well organised teachers. They can put up with pretty average assessment practices. But what they really don't want to put up with is a teacher who doesn't care about them, who is not interested in them, who doesn't pretend to be interested in them, who doesn't have professional behaviours when talking to them, talks to them rudely, ignores their emails. These are professional and personal effectiveness. Okay? And so we felt we had to put those in. So they're criteria. And why? Because every one of them has been linked to a positive student experience and better learning. So this is where the two things come together. So if we're going to reward and recognise teaching, fabulous. What do we count? What do we focus on? Things that matter about student learning. And we need to put them together. And no one's much going to argue about those, because those are the things that teachers do. Some people are going to be brilliant at some and not so good at others, and that's fine. You can't have people who are good at everything, generally speaking. Sometimes they do and they're extraordinary, but excellent people don't necessarily do all of those 7 at a very high level. And some teachers aren't terribly brilliant in the classroom teaching, but their contribution to curriculum development and design, category number 1, criterion 1, at the program level, they might have brought in this new and innovative program, they've set it up, they've got it all happening, they've worked it all, they've organised it all, they've influenced the National Accreditation Board that approves that, they've done work internationally, and other people are coming and saying this is the most fabulous curriculum, but they teach a class sort of okay, but not brilliant. Should they be promoted? Absolutely. Okay? So it's thinking about the different strengths and the different capacities of the people, and understanding that not everyone's going to be brilliant in front of the class, and not everyone's going to be brilliant at everything all the time. But we should understand what might be acceptable. Threshold standards. What's the minimum that everyone should meet? And then how do we then identify excellence as a result of that? Okay? And I can tell you that with the National Teaching Awards, one of the people who won one year the Prime Minister's Award, so there's about 10 disciplinary awards that are awarded to excellent teachers nationally. Yeah. And then one selected to be the Prime Minister's Award. It was a colleague of mine. And he wasn't entertaining. He didn't tell jokes. Someone who was a Vice-Chancellor of a university said, I was once taught by him, I did a whole program. We never laughed once. He said, but by gosh, we learnt. And this person had a national and international reputation in terms of their work with the discipline, with the community, and so on. He was a competent teacher. He was an engaged teacher. They knew he wanted them to work. He worked them hard. He set high standards. He helped them get there. But no, he wasn't entertaining. He wasn't a performer. But he won the Prime Minister's Award that year. So we do need to understand teaching and teachers as not all having the same set of skills. So often we overemphasise, say, number 2, the teaching part of it, what we do in the class, as distinct to those other things that are just as important. Okay? So those criteria, because they enhance student learning and this experience. And while we're at it, why don't we have some research criteria, please? Nobody has it. Everyone has lists of evidence. You do not have research criteria. Maybe you have one in there. Do a lot, publish. But that's actually evidence, a list of evidence. So thinking about, so number 4 is a criteria about publishing. But it doesn't actually say how many or whatever, that's something else. So think about your criteria for service as well. So we should have criteria for all of the dimensions that we value, and then we should start to think about, and we've had criteria for a while, not so much for research, but we've had that. But then it's not sufficient in and of itself. We need to, and I don't expect you to read that, but I'm trying to show you that we need to spell out what it might look like, and that we can start to say what might be a minimum standard of expectation in that. So here these are the 5 levels of appointment in Australia. So if you're a lecturer A, that would be an assistant lecturer in our terms. That's what it looks like. And that if you're in a B, there, C, D, E, and it's possible, and you have one of these for each of your criterion, spell it out. And when you get up here to a professor level, you've got a leadership role, and you're recognised nationally and internationally. So it's not just a person who teaches a lot and teaches well, and I don't mean just teaching a lot and teaching well is important, but that's your job. It doesn't mean you get promoted on that. Okay? People can research a lot and research well, still not get the grants or the publications or whatever. So we have to have different capacity, but we need to spell it out and we make it clear. And we can do this for research as well. Under each of those criterion, what does it look like? So you can start to say, I have a strength here, I'm doing that, or I'm not doing that and I should be. And then make a plan to get there. So the way it works is there are indicative standards, not that ours are right, and we have indicative evidence. And sometimes we say you should do something, and then at the next level you do something a bit more, at a higher level, then a higher level, and then a higher level. And then sometimes we don't introduce something till a later level. So it looks a bit like this. So if we're talking about the criterion 6, evaluation of practice and continuing professional development, we want lecturers or people at that level to participate in teaching-related professional development. But if you're a lecturer B, we want systematic participation, so that you're doing it deliberatively and planning for it. And at lecturer C, we might want you to contribute and participate, so that you've got a role in your discipline or your faculty or your university where you're doing a bit of leadership there. Associate professor, evidence of leadership and contribution. And E, a sustained and successful commitment to the engagement of professional development at international or national level. So you can see it's sort of a higher level going up. But other times it might just be complete a foundation of teaching program as a requirement, and it doesn't keep going. Or completion of HDR supervision, higher education research training, and so on. So that's the way the framework's developed. And then there's indicative evidence for it. Now, so all of them are set up like that. And it's saying, these aren't right, they're not necessarily right for you, but we can start to detail it. Okay? And then we need to think about the sources of evidence. Because, teaching's very hard to evidence. Research, we've got it sorted. Teaching, very hard. No, it's not. Sorry. These sources of evidence have been identified very clearly from, as I could find back to about the 1970s. Probably existed further, but none of that was digitalised, and the journals have all been taken out of libraries now. Everything's digital. But at least from the 1970s, we've been able to say we should be drawing on 4 sources of evidence for teaching. And when we're talking about the teacher and the learner, we can use these 4 sources, and we should. And when we're talking about teaching and learning at the program level, we should use these 4 sources. And when we're talking about teaching and learning at the faculty level, we should be using these 4 sources. And when we're talking at the institutional level, we should use those 4 sources. And when we're doing a national review, we should use those 4 sources. And in fact, we do. We've been using those 4 sources at the national and international level for a very long time. Not so much here. So we need to rethink that. Okay, so I'm not going to rehearse what those things all are. We had a workshop on that, and there's things there that you can source, but you can see that we're talking about self-assessment. Whether it's me, I have to talk about and think about what it is I'm doing on a systematic basis. Systematic, not just, I had a good idea. I think I'll try it. It has to be, I was reading about this and I thought it was good, or I went to a presentation and I saw someone do something and I thought I'm going to do that, and I read about it, and then I went to a workshop on it, and then I did it and the students said it was rubbish. But I'm really committed to this, so I did it and I realised I didn't do it very well. So I did it again, and now the students are really engaged. So it's evidence-based on practice as well as information. We should be drawing on our peers and colleagues. We need to open up not only our classrooms but everything we do in our teaching. Classroom teaching is one dimension that can be peer reviewed. There are at least 10 others. We have to open up our doors, we have to open up our practice, and we have to seek and get peer comment and colleague feedback on our work, but also who can make judgments on the quality of that. Student input, of which one is your student surveys. There's lots of others. Whoops. And student achievement. And hey, we're about student learning. Wouldn't it be nice if we included evidence of student learning in the effectiveness of our teaching? We don't, we should, we can. Let's use all 4. Okay? Not one. So we've always relied too much on student surveys as one input, because it's somehow independent. It's somehow reliable, except it isn't because we all hate it, but in fact it is really reliable and robust, and we should use it better. And there's a lot of research to show that students are very perfectly valid, reliable and robust to make judgments on us. And it's fine. They're the ones experiencing us, but it shouldn't be the only one. Okay? And there's lots more. So all of that framework is evidenced from those 4 sources at all times. So we've got the evidence. Do you want to put a number to it? Oh, if you really want to, you can put numbers to some of these things, but what does it tell you? And that's fine. But they are subjective, and that's fine. But we should be using a mixture. So people who like a formula, this one's not bad. Teaching quality, competence plus productive behaviours times personal attributes. So under the competence would be our criteria, plus and productive behaviours. So we can detail what those are, N equals X, and so therefore we would have teaching quality. So we need to make sure that whatever the criteria, and whatever the evidence, that they are in the service of students and their learning. Because if we put them up there, that's what people will do. Just as we've seen with research. Publish more, tick, it happens. So let's choose ones wisely, but let's make sure they're not ones that are just convenient. And sometimes we fall into that trap. Oh, let's not put any effort or time into coming up with teaching indicators. We've put in 20 years to come up with our research indicators. Let me tell you, 30 years ago, no one agreed that publication numbers mattered or citation matters. Didn't exist. Quality of journal? What? All of those have been decided over time. Okay? And that's been 30 years of effort there. Wouldn't it be nice if we put some effort in deciding what matters for teaching and how we can make judgments on that? So if we're going to stick numbers to it, fine. But let's do it systematically and put a bit of effort into it instead of just pulling out a number. And if we count it, we'll take notice of it. And then we need to make sure that this counts in terms of reward and recognition of teachers, including promotion for excellence in teaching. We're not saying volume, we're not saying quantity, we're saying excellence. Let's have a conversation of what excellence is, and let's start working towards it. And here's the big message. Engagement of leaders at all levels of the sector and institution is critical if change is to be achieved and sustained. Now, this is happening. It may sound like a pipe dream, but it isn't. There is institutional commitment from many, many, many universities, many of them the very top research institutions and so on. Most people know we've got the balance wrong, and this is happening. But it is an endeavour that everyone needs to engage in. So as teachers, we've got to support our leaders. We're very, very, very good at critiquing. Here's a policy, oh, let's tear it apart. If we get a policy that's half reasonable, can we please support it and improve it over time? If we get someone saying something, can we say yes instead of saying, oh yes, but do they really mean it? So we're extraordinarily good at polishing a problem. Oh, it's hard. Let's form a committee. Let's keep meeting for the next 5 years. Let's argue about whether it should have a full stop or apostrophe, or is that word really the right word? So can we give everyone a little bit of room to manoeuvre and live with things that aren't always perfect, but make a few steps forward and then rework things again and keep going? But in fact, we're often our own worst enemies. And we say, oh, it's not perfect, let's not adopt it. And so we stop a lot of things ourselves by our natural cynicism and our natural conservatism in terms of things particularly around our careers and particularly around our lives. Oh no, it means I've got to change. It means I've got to have a peer make some comment about me. It means I might have to revise my lecture. So we do need to engage, and all of us have a leadership role in that. We can't just say the university. We are the university. Everyone in this room is the university. Everyone who's not in this room is the university. So the university is us. And so we're the ones who can make the change, and we can all show leadership in that way as well. A more satisfied staff. And an occasional reward, and I think you might have a reward at the end of this conference in a similar way. But let's reward and recognise. Let's celebrate. Let's not say, oh, they won a teaching award. Poor thing. let's all ignore them. They're probably embarrassed about it. Perhaps we should put their name on a poster. Maybe we should announce it at graduation. Maybe we should put their name on an honour board. Maybe the dean could tell everyone about it instead of just pretending. So let's celebrate people. And our reward will also be for our students and our community. Anything you want, all those frameworks and things I talked about, they're all there, downloadable, PDF, Word. Take them, rip them apart, change them. But perhaps use them to start a conversation for what might be your criteria for quality teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. It's been such a great pleasure to have you here for a whole week. We want to have it for the next 5 years or so. We have a few minutes for questions, if there are. Okay. See how clear you are?
I know.
Yeah.
No, coffee is outside.
Right, yeah. But before coffee, we just want to give you a small presentation. You can see a lot of pink in here.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is our pink day. We forgot to tell you about it.
Sorry.
So, yeah. So we want to, and that is the October is the month of cancer, especially for female cancer. So this is the pink ribbon that is created in Iceland.
Thank you.
So you can put it on and be a little bit pink. You do have some pinks, and there's a small little present to take with you back home.
Thank you.
So thank you for your contribution.
I appreciate this, but thank you. I have enjoyed my week here, and I'm very happy to continue our conversation in any way that might help or support you, but please do feel that you can. Thank you.
And actually, she went to a play yesterday. We both learned how to become Icelandic in 60 minutes.
And I am now.
So she is now an Icelandic. I don't know if she can recite the last lesson.
Oh, not unless I get into the...
Yeah, but it's þetta reddast. So that's what we will take with us into this dialogue. So thank you again. Thank you very much.